I am a senior student at a small high school in the countryside, where everything seems to be calm and monotonous. Summer has passed, and football has become the hot topic as the new season begins. Our school's football team always performs well, making the Marches a major event in town. One Friday, after school, my close friends Sam, Lisa, and Jenny decided to go watch the game that evening. That evening, the atmosphere became electric as we gathered in front of the school. Sam, with his humorous personality, had planned a fun night with some drinks and snacks. Before the game started, we stopped by a local diner to grab some drinks and light bites. After that, the whole group drove to the stadium, where everyone was eagerly rushing in. The sky began to darken as we found seats in the top row. Our team had started strong, but then began to falter. By the third quarter, the atmosphere grew heavy as we realized that the home team had no chance of winning. Some students left the stands, but we stayed, deciding that we would head to the field after the game to meet the players. Eventually, when the game ended in a crushing defeat, the atmosphere fell silent. The team hurried off the field, while the fans quickly dispersed. We stayed for a bit to soak in the atmosphere. As the lights on the field dimmed, darkness enveloped everything. Only the faint glow of the moon remained, and we decided to venture out a little. Sam, with his humorous idea, suggested that we should head into the woods next to the football field. Lisa and Jenny initially looked worried, but eventually they were persuaded. We climbed over the fence and started venturing deeper into the forest. The air in the woods was cool and slightly mysterious. As we ran into the trees, the sound of our footsteps echoed, and the crunch of dry branches beneath our feet created an eerie symphony. While we were hiding, I suddenly felt an eerie presence. Even though it was dark, I could see a large shadow standing between two trees not far away. My heart raced, and a wave of fear washed over me. Then a woman's voice echoed through the silence.
"You shouldn't be here."
I turned to look at Sam and noticed that he, too, looked equally terrified. Without hesitation, we immediately turned back and ran quickly to search for Lisa and Jenny. We shouted their names until we found them in a state of panic. They asked us what had happened, and we told them about the strange voice and the shadow in the woods. They looked at us with skepticism, but I knew that this could not be just our imagination. After leaving the woods, I couldn't erase the memory of that voice and shadow from my mind. I didn't talk about it with anyone, fearing that people would think I was crazy. But every time I walked past the forest near the school, I felt like someone was watching me. Summer passed, and I returned to school as a janitor. One day, while I was cleaning, I felt something strange again. I heard an unusual noise in the hallway. When I went to check, I saw a dark shadow standing at the end of the hallway. But when I got closer, there was no one there. After a few days, I realized that strange things continued to happen. There were unexplained noises at night, and I felt like someone was watching me. I went to the principal's office and asked about the strange rumors surrounding the school, but he just shook his head and said there was nothing unusual. But I don't believe it. That voice was very familiar, as if I had heard it before. That night, I decided to stay a little later to finish cleaning up, and it happened again. That strange voice, and in an instant, I saw a woman standing right in front of my classroom in the opposite hallway. She was looking straight at me. I was startled and ran down to the place of the security guard on night shift. I told him to come with me to check the place out. But when we arrived, the girl seemed to have disappeared again. He told me it was probably just a hallucination because I was tired, but I don't agree with that, because I'm sure I can't be mistaken. Eventually, after a long time, I decided that I would not return to school anymore. I could no longer live in this fear and anxiety. The memories of the dark figure in the woods still haunted me, and I wondered if I was truly safe in the school I once loved. From then on, I learned that not everything that happens can be explained, and some things are best left in the dark. I was a 10th grade student when the strange events began to occur. Autumn was at its most beautiful, with vibrant yellow leaves falling, creating a stunning backdrop for my high school. During lunch, I usually just sat with my two friends, Liam and Mike. However, the atmosphere in the classroom was always filled with laughter and noise. One day in astronomy class, a new student walked in. Our teacher, who always enjoyed teasing the students, asked him to introduce himself. His name was Alex. I didn't think much about him until he chose to sit next to me. Alex seemed quite shy and struggled to fit in with those around him. When he sat down, I turned to him and we exchanged glances. "Hi, I'm Sam," I said. Alex didn't respond immediately. He just nodded and looked down at his desk. A strange feeling began to creep in, but I tried to maintain a positive attitude. As we talked more, I started to realize that Alex had odd and crude jokes that made me feel uncomfortable. He frequently swore and shared stories that were inappropriate for our age. While I wasn't particularly sensitive, the way he spoke made me shiver. When lunchtime came, Mike was absent that day, leaving only Liam and me. Suddenly, I saw Alex walk into the cafeteria, heading straight toward our table.
Can I sit here?
I felt uneasy, but could only nod. Liam looked at me with a skeptical expression, and I understood that he also felt uncomfortable. Throughout lunch, Alex talked a lot, but his stories became increasingly strange. When he began recounting a bizarre experience in the woods, I felt a chill run down my spine.
There was a dark figure that followed me while I was walking in the woods,
Alex said in a serious tone. Liam and I exchanged worried glances, unsure if he was telling the truth or just making it up. As time went on, the tension in the classroom grew. Alex continued to ask me personal questions, making me feel increasingly uncomfortable. One day, he texted me, "I'll be waiting for you at the school gate." I felt anxious and unsure of what to do. While I didn't want to cut ties with him, I knew I needed to keep my distance. One afternoon, as I was walking home, I felt like someone was following me. When I turned around, I saw Alex standing in the distance, staring at me with a vacant expression. He said in a monotone voice,
I saw you in class today.
I felt a chill run down my spine and could only nod before quickening my pace. When I got home, I texted Liam about the situation. Liam advised me to be careful, but I couldn't keep avoiding Alex forever. One night, while I was doing my homework, I received a message from an unknown number. "I see you." My heart sank. I couldn't believe that Alex had found a way to contact me. The feeling of unease intensified when I received another message later that night. "I've been waiting for you in the woods. Come." I didn't dare step outside. The anxiety kept me awake, and throughout the night, I found myself frequently checking the windows and doors, worried that Alex would suddenly appear. The next morning, as I arrived at school, my heart raced at the sight of Alex. He was standing at the school gate, looking at me with an expectant gaze. I tried to avoid looking his way, but the anxiety gnawed at me, making it difficult to concentrate on my lessons. The thought of having to confront him filled me with growing dread. On another afternoon, during recess, I saw Alex standing nearby, talking to a group of other students. He wasn't looking at me, but I felt as though he was watching me from a distance. The unsettling feeling made me consider transferring schools, but I didn't want to do that. After many days of feeling anxious, I decided to go to a teacher and report my concerns about Alex. They conducted an investigation. In one afternoon, I was called to the principal's office.
We have searched for information about Alex, but we found nothing to suggest he has ever attended here. What's wrong with you?
I felt as if a cold wind had just swept through. Finally, when summer arrived, I decided to enroll in a summer class at another school, hoping that the new environment would help me forget these unpleasant memories. But the long nights still kept me from sleeping peacefully. Every time I heard strange noises, I felt like someone was watching me. This story is not just about Alex, but also about the fear of not knowing what lies ahead. Although I tried to forget, the ghosts of those memories always lingered in my mind. Every time I heard strange noises, the fear rushed back, reminding me that there are things we can never control. Even though I transferred schools and started a new life, the obsession with Alex still haunted me. Every footstep, every distant shadow sent me into a panic, unsure of whether he would come back or not. Gradually, the stress and anxiety took a toll on my mental health. I began therapy and sought help from a doctor. They advised me to keep a journal to release my emotions and seek peace. Each time I wrote, I recounted the events that had transpired and my feelings, from which I sought a way to end this fear. Although the recovery process was not easy, I found strength within myself. I realized that fear could not stop me from living my life. I decided to participate in social activities, make new friends, and gradually overcome the fears of the past. However, the memories of Alex remained in my mind as a lesson about vigilance and personal strength. Sometimes, in my dreams, I still see his figure, but now I no longer feel fear. I have learned to confront my fears and understand that life goes on. I live in a remote countryside area in New Brunswick. At the beginning of September, I entered my 10th grade year, and unfortunately, I had to repeat it. As a result, I returned to school as a 19-year-old student. My high school and middle school are housed in the same large building, so I know most of the students due to the small number of pupils in the school. In the first class, I had a study period. Looking around, I spotted a new face. A student was sitting in the corner of the classroom, whom I had never seen before. I decided to go over and introduce myself. "Hi, I'm Emma," I said. He replied, "I'm Danny. I just moved here." I showed Danny around the school and pointed out where his next class was. But as I was guiding him, I noticed that he seemed a bit strange. Danny started asking me many questions, from how long I had been studying here to what my next class was. However, some of his questions made me uncomfortable, such as, "Can you tell me your address and your Snapchat account?" I was a bit taken aback and decided not to give him my address, but I thought it would be fine to share my Snapchat. In the end, I provided it to him and continued with my day at school. When the English class ended, I walked into a classroom with about 9 students. Sitting in the back row was my preferred spot, and just then, Danny chose to sit next to me. The class hadn't started yet, and everyone was still chatting, and when I looked up, I saw Danny staring at me. It felt as if his gaze was piercing through to my soul. I tried to focus on the lesson, but I couldn't shake off his presence. Suddenly, my phone buzzed, and it was a message from Danny. "Follow me," he wrote. I felt annoyed and didn't reply. A moment later, I saw him stand up and ask the teacher if he could go to the restroom. As soon as he left the classroom, I asked to follow him. As I stepped outside, I saw Danny walking slowly down the hallway, and a sense of unease began to rise within me. I didn't want to follow him, but a part of me felt drawn to do so. I trailed behind him at a safe distance and watched as he entered a dark hallway where there were no classrooms, just closed doors. As I approached the door that Danny had just opened, I felt an unsettling sensation wash over me. For some reason, I sensed that something was off, so I decided to head back to class. However, when I returned, Danny had sent me a strange message. "Why didn't you come in? I'm waiting for you." A chill ran down my spine. That evening, when I got home, I felt as though someone was watching me. I locked the door tightly and felt a little safer. But while I was watching videos on YouTube, my phone received another notification from Snapchat. Someone had just added me as a friend. The username was, "Why didn't you come in?" I blocked that account immediately, but a few minutes later, another message arrived. "I can see you." I panicked and looked out the window, but I saw no one. A wave of fear washed over me. I called my mum, but no one answered. A little while later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Danny. "I'm standing in front of your house." My heart raced, and I ran to the window to check, but I still saw no one. Hearing a knock at the door, I cautiously asked, "Who is it?"
It's me, Danny.
I felt like millions of mosquitoes were buzzing around my head. The name Danny echoed like a haunting sound, sending chills down my spine. I didn't dare to open the door. I just stood there, frozen in place, my mind racing with confusion and fear. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I ran to the phone to call the police. "I need help. There's someone following me." I whispered in fear. The police told me to find a safe place to hide. I immediately sought refuge in the closet in my bedroom, trying to stay silent. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. My breathing became rapid. After about 10 minutes, the sound of police sirens filled the air. The front door opened, and I heard the police calling out.
Is anyone in there?
I quickly opened the door, and they escorted me outside. They searched the house and found no one, but they confirmed that the window in my room had been broken. The police discovered signs that someone had entered the house and rummaged through everything. Some of my belongings were in disarray, and a few electronic items had gone missing. The strangest part was that they found footprints leading from the window to my desk, where I had been sitting doing homework just minutes before. After the investigation, the police reported that the intruder had escaped before they arrived. Although the incident had occurred, the feeling of fear still lingered. I decided not to stay at home any longer and packed a few items to stay over at a friend's house. When I got to Jack's house, I recounted the entire incident to him. Jack and I talked all night about the strange things I had encountered. I couldn't stop thinking about the coincidence between Danny and the odd messages. There seemed to be an unexplainable connection. The next morning, I received a message from the school regarding a student suspected of causing trouble. My heart stopped when I saw Danny's name. I didn't know if he had been arrested or not, but the fear inside me never subsided. In the following days, I avoided everyone, not wanting to interact with anyone. Even with a good friend by my side, the anxiety lingered. The story about Danny and those terrifying events had become a part of my life, making me realize that not everyone we meet is trustworthy. In truth, I learned a valuable lesson about vigilance and fear. The games, the memories, and the strange events continued to haunt me, ensuring I would never forget what had happened. Now, every time I put on my headphones to play games, I feel as if something is lurking, as if someone is waiting for me in the darkness. I live in a small town in northern Delaware, and things were pretty quiet until I started my 10th grade year. I wasn't lucky enough to avoid repeating this year, returning to school as a 19-year-old student. Our high school isn't big and is designed in an open style, with all the classrooms located in a single building. Therefore, most people know each other, especially during the early days of the school year. On the first day, I had a study period at the beginning. While sitting and waiting for class to start, I noticed a new boy I had never seen before. He was sitting in the opposite row, looking a bit out of place. I decided to go over and introduce myself. "Hi, I'm Leela," I said. He looked up at me with wide eyes and replied,
I'm Victor, just moved here.
Victor seemed shy, but I tried to help him get familiar with the school. We chatted for a while, and I noticed he asked a lot of questions about the school, the classes, and even about my personal life. One strange question he asked was about my address and social media account. This made me feel uncomfortable. I refused to give him my address, but eventually gave him my social media account. We wrapped up the conversation and headed into class. In English class, there were only about 7 students. I sat in the back, and Victor chose to sit near me as well. During the lesson, I felt him frequently glancing my way, but I tried not to pay attention. After class ended, Victor approached me again and suggested we work on our assignments together. Although I felt a bit uneasy, I agreed. The more we worked together, the more I felt that he was different from ordinary friends. He often shared strange and somewhat quirky stories. Victor seemed oblivious to the oddness in his tales, and each time he spoke, I felt a chill run down my spine. By the end of the class, we exchanged phone numbers, something I would soon regret. After school, I went home and sat down to play video games. But while I was relaxing, suddenly a message popped up from Victor. "I'm standing outside your house." I felt a chill run down my spine and couldn't understand how he knew where I lived. I decided not to respond and locked the door tight. Anxiety swelled within me, and I couldn't stop thinking about this strange boy. By evening, I heard a knock on the door. My parents weren't home, and I felt terrified, unsure whether to open it. I had no idea if Victor was actually standing outside. The knocking stopped, and instead, the doorbell rang. I panicked and decided to call my friends for comfort. They advised me to call the police, but I felt too scared to do that. Finally, I decided to peek through the peephole. But when I looked out, I saw no one. A heavy feeling settled in my chest as I thought about what could happen. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Just as I was on the call, I suddenly heard a sigh and a faint noise outside my bedroom window. My heart stopped, and I backed away, too afraid to breathe loudly. The police arrived very quickly afterward. They checked the area and asked me to open the door. After confirming that there was no one outside, they inquired about Victor. For the first time, I spoke about his strange behavior and how he had been constantly watching me. The police took my information and left, but I felt anxious knowing he was still out there somewhere nearby. The next day, I returned to school with a heavy heart. Even though the police hadn't found Victor, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. In class, everything seemed normal until I spotted Victor sitting at another desk. Whenever I glanced over, he would grin in a creepy way, sending chills down my spine. I knew he was keeping his eyes on me. The following weeks, my life took a turn for the worse. Victor kept showing up in places I frequently visited. No matter how hard I tried to avoid him, it seemed he always found a way to appear. Each time he did, the feeling of unease would wash over me. I decided to skip any after-school activities and spent more time at home instead. One afternoon, when I was home alone, I heard a knock at the door. I didn't think it was Victor, but when I looked through the peephole, I saw a familiar figure standing outside. My heart raced as I spotted his face. I was so terrified that I didn't dare to open the door, only listening quietly from inside. "Lila, open the door. I just want to talk," Victor said in a calm voice. I felt a cold sweat break out, and I decided to call the police once again. While I was on the phone, suddenly I heard glass shatter. I turned around and saw Victor climbing in through the window. It felt like my world was collapsing. I ran into my bedroom, hiding in the closet and praying that he wouldn't find me. I heard footsteps entering the house, calling my name. It felt like I was living in a nightmare. Time passed slowly, but eventually I heard the sound of police sirens. Victor had left the house, and I had no idea what would happen next. When the police arrived, they searched the entire house. They discovered footprints leading from the window to my room. They asked me about the messages Victor had sent, and I recounted everything. They promised to investigate but couldn't guarantee they would find him. Since then, I lived in fear. I no longer dared to go anywhere alone, and every time there was a knock at the door, I felt my heart stop. What had happened to me left mental scars that I would probably never forget. That fear followed me through the following months, and whenever there was light from outside, I felt as though a pair of eyes was watching me. Ultimately, I decided to never return to school again, not because I disliked studying, but for a deeper reason, something inexplicable from the past. When I was in high school, I had a group of around 10 friends, but we rarely did anything together. On a gloomy afternoon during history class, I was sitting with Jared, Michelle, and Anna. We had a substitute teacher that day and no assignments, so the atmosphere in the class was quite relaxed. Our school was an old building, constructed in the 1930s, and within the campus, there was an abandoned building that was rumored to have been used as a kindergarten in the 1940s. During class, we started discussing the idea of breaking into the old building that night. Everyone felt a rush of excitement, and the stories about strange occurrences and the abandoned structure only heightened our enthusiasm. Even though the building had been left to decay, we all knew that many secrets were hidden within its walls. As darkness descended, we stealthily entered the school grounds through a small path, evading the watchful eyes of the security guard. The four of us made our way to the old building, which was surrounded by a fence. Jared and I helped the girls climb over the fence before we followed suit. The building loomed large, but it had fallen into disrepair. The walls were covered in moss, and the windows barely had any glass left. An eerie feeling enveloped us, but curiosity propelled us inside. After breaking a window, we crawled inside. The air was cold, and a musty smell filled the space. I turned on my flashlight to illuminate the surroundings, but the lights only highlighted the eerie nature of the empty room. We began to explore each room one by one. The abandoned classrooms, with their scattered desks and chairs, along with the faded pictures on the walls, created a scene reminiscent of a horror movie. When I walked into a classroom, I felt like someone was watching me. Although there was no one else in the building, I couldn't shake off the feeling that a pair of eyes was staring at me. I called out the names of my friends, but no one answered. I began to feel anxious. Jared, Anna, Michelle. I shouted, but only received an echo in return. While searching for them, I heard a faint whisper, like someone was talking. I followed the sound of the whisper to another classroom. When I entered, there was no one inside, but the window was wide open and a cold breeze blew in. When I turned back, I saw Jared standing in the doorway, his expression uneasy. He asked,
Did you hear that?
I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine. Michelle and Anna were gone, and my anxiety was growing. "We should get out of here," I suggested, but Jared stopped me.
Wait a minute, they might be hiding from us.
That made me feel even more anxious. I didn't want to stay in this room any longer, where the silence only heightened my sense of insecurity. Suddenly, the whispering echoed once more, this time clearer.
Get out. Get out.
I couldn't understand who was speaking, but it was clear that it wasn't any of my friends. "We need to find them," I said to Jared, and we began searching throughout the building. We entered each classroom, our calls echoing in the empty space. But there was no one. Time seemed to stand still, and the feeling of unease grew stronger. When we reached the last room, the door swung open on its own, and inside there was a flickering light. Stepped inside, and the sight before us was terrifying. Old photographs of children and teachers hung on the walls, but every picture had a large scratch across it, as if someone had tried to deface them. In the center of the room, a large table held an old projector and a large sheet of paper covered in strange scribbles. "Don't get too close," I said, but Jared moved closer to the table. He said,
Maybe this is just a prank.
but I felt something was off. Suddenly, the projector light flickered on, and an image of a classroom appeared. In it, children were sitting at their desks, but terror was etched clearly across their faces. I felt dizzy. "Get out!" I yelled, pulling Jared's arm. When we turned back, the door to the room was tightly shut.
What?
Jared shouted, panicking. I pushed against the door, but it wouldn't budge. The light from the projector gradually dimmed, and a woman's voice echoed from somewhere in the darkness.
Why are you here?
Jared and I stood frozen in fear. We just want to find our friends," I stammered. "Don't try to run away," the voice echoed again, this time closer.
Stay here with me.
We were panicking, and I started banging on the door. Finally, a strong gust of wind blew through, and the door swung open on its own. We didn't look back, sprinting into the darkness. We called out for Michelle and Anna, but there was no response. We didn't know which way to go, just wanting to escape that building. As we approached the exit, I saw two figures standing there. I thought it was Michelle and Anna, but as I got closer, I realized it was an elderly woman, her face scraggly and her eyes sharp. She said,
You shouldn't be here.
Jared and I didn't dare to respond. We could only step back. She moved closer, the moonlight highlighting the strange features of her face.
Leave now or you will never return.
We dashed outside, not looking back. Sprinting through the forest, we didn't stop until we reached the main road. Sweat soaked through our backs, but we didn't dare to breathe a sigh of relief until we were home. When I got home, the group was there, and I recounted what had happened. They didn't believe me, thinking it was just a prank. But I knew something had happened in that building, and I would never go back. Time passed, but the image of that woman and what we encountered in the old building remained etched in my mind. Occasionally, when I walked past the forest, I still felt as if eyes were watching me, reminding me of the secrets we could never comprehend. The memory of that night never faded, and I knew that mysterious things were still lurking in the shadows of forgotten places.